Hello again, everyone. You're listening to another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. My name is Jeff Mix. I'm Executive Platform's Head of Content and Research. My guest today is John Mao. John is the Director of Operations and Supply Chain Strategy at Ocean Spray Cranberries, a farmer-owned cooperative. John oversees the Ocean Spray manufacturing system deployment focused on Lean, Six Sigma, and continuous improvement across their 6 food and 4 beverage manufacturing plants, along with the network optimization and network design and strategy for the end-to-end global supply chain. John and his organization also own the 2030 vision for the ocean spray supply chain as it prepares for the 100th anniversary of the cooperative in 2030. John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. Super excited to talk to you guys today and share a little bit about what's going on.
I want to start off with a confession. I know you're speaking at our upcoming North American Supply Chain Executive Summit, and I do want to get into supply chain content soon. It was only as I was putting together my notes for this interview that I first spotted you're so connected to lean manufacturing, which is a topic I love. Some of the first conferences I ever did in my career were lean manufacturing conferences. So you're a Lean Six Sigma green belt. Before coming to Ocean Spray, you worked for a decade at Rockwell Automation, including 5 years working on international locations. I know Rockwell Automation embraces a culture of continuous improvement to the point where, they run their own training and certification programs. I promise the rest of the interview will be about supply chain strategy, but can we talk about your background in lean manufacturing a little first? How did you first get into it? When did it become a big part of your career? And how much of what you learned and applied on the manufacturing side of your career works just as well in the supply chain roles that you've had over the years?
Yeah, it started definitely very early in my career, and it was really spurred by a lot of the leaders that were mentoring and coaching me early on. And really, it was less about kind of the certifications and the governing bodies of lean, but really kind of training me how to think as a supply chain leader and as a manufacturing leader. So as I was in jobs, how do I think about problems? How do I solve problems? And ultimately, then how do I coach teams to solve problems in their day-to-day work? And really, I would say that's where kind of my lean journey started, is not so much of all the kind of the tools and the methodologies, but it took what was kind of the practical nature of education and university that I went through around supply chain operations, then essentially made it real. And then you applied that lean thinking and that lean learning into, you're going to face 100 and some odd problems every single day as a supply chain and manufacturing leader. And ultimately, it's how do you go into your toolbox and lean on experiences and lean on training to solve problems quickly, but also enable teams that are in the front line to solve those problems before they even get to you. So my lean journey really started from the leaders that I was fortunate to work for early on in my career at Rockwell. And I credit really a lot of what I've learned and grown up over the last 10, 12 years of career to them. I think without them, I'm not sure where I would be. But they really instilled with me this idea of how do you have a lean thinking mindset, problem solving mindset, and then ultimately how do you translate that down to your teams. You can't solve every problem. It's really, once you get to a certain point in your career, it's how do you create a culture that people are problem solvers as well.
I love it. You are hosting a focus group at the North American Supply Chain Executive Summit this September in Arizona. The topic is going to be establishing your supply chain's long-term vision. What does creating a strategy to deliver a long-term vision look like?
Yeah, it's multifaceted. I think stepping into Ocean Spray, we were tasked to look at how to create a strategy. But as I took kind of what I had learned prior in career to where I am now, there's a few key things that I would say when you're creating a supply chain strategy that ultimately come to life when you're building that. One, it's the cross-functional nature of supply chain. So multidisciplined, multifunctional within the supply chain itself. But supply chain is unique in a sense that it touches every single function across the enterprise. So as you're building your supply chain strategy, a lot of it has to do with what are the inputs you're getting from cross-functional stakeholders, your sales and marketing teams, your research and development teams, your sustainability initiatives. How do you embed that into what you're trying to accomplish from an organizational execution standpoint with supply chain? The second part I would say is, how do you take what is really high-level strategy and operationalize it for your teams? I think many times people look at operations as kind of a back office function of, hey, you just do the same thing over and over again. And that's very much true. It's the engine that builds and produces products and services for customers, or services based on the industry that you're in. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the key piece of that for your people in the supply chain and operations function is really around how do you help them understand what they're doing every single day plays into the larger picture of not only the supply chain function, but then also the over enterprise as a whole. And for me, that's probably the third part around the supply chain strategy is this is not your company strategy, right? Most companies have a corporate or a long range plan that they're executing to, and really trying to drive, whether that's from an earnings perspective, from a market expansion perspective, a growth perspective. And the supply chain focus is a tenant of that. It's our job to ultimately ensure that we are providing the goods and services, ensuring resiliency and redundancy, irrespective of disruption, to support what the company ultimately wants to achieve. That long range plan and that vision that the commercial and the sales and the marketing team is driving to from where do you want your business to be ultimately has to be supported from an operational footprint and operational execution, but also the resiliency and redundancy to weather any disruption that could be faced as you're going through and achieving those goals.
I'm really encouraged that we have supply chain leaders like yourself talking about long-term visions again. It feels like in the last few years, so much of the conversation has been about how we're living in an age of disruption, where resiliency and agility and the ability to roll with the punches is where supply chain leaders, have to be putting their energy. I would love for you to expand a little bit upon the importance of creating a strategy that delivers on proactive long-term goals, and also maybe some of the nuts and bolts. Like, what are you really doing in your day-to-day to deliver that long-term objective?
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that I think COVID shocked a lot of functions, right? And ultimately supply chain. I don't miss the days where supply chain disruption was the number one headline on the Wall Street Journal, or you tell someone, "Oh, hey, what do you do for work?" Well, I work in supply chain. They're like, "Oh boy, I'm so sorry." And really nobody, not to say nobody understood what it was before, but no one really, what I'll say, understood what it meant when they would go to the grocery store and they couldn't get what they wanted on the shelf. Then they knew, okay, well, there's a supply chain behind that that makes that happen. For me, it was more around shifting the mindset of the supply chain is really a back office function that sits behind the scenes. Nobody really thinks about. A bunch of people punch keys or they push product down the line, to ensuring that the business teams understood, hey, you want to go here, or you want to enter this market, or you want to introduce this product. In order to do that, you've got to have a supply chain that supports it. So as we thought about, and really any company thinks about where do they want to be, operations, in all honesty, and maybe selfishly from my view, is probably seat one or two at the table of how do we operationalize this, right? You can have the coolest marketing campaign, the best sales strategy, but if you can't actually deliver the goods and services that you want, it's just a story. It's not an actual real life experience. As we look at that in day-to-day life for our employees, it's a combination of what I'll call working on the business, but also working in the business, right? And depending on your role and level, that teeter totter changes, right? As you're higher up in career, you're spending more time working on the business. As you're at a lower level in the organization, you're probably spending more time planning a part, ensuring a delivery, helping ensure a purchase order is delivered on time. And that's really working in the business. What we wanted folks to understand, and really what I think is important, a part of a supply chain strategy, is your job is going to flex more as technology improves, as processes improve, and as you develop your strategy around, you're actually going to spend more time working on the business to prepare and enhance things that are actually happening in the business. So you're working on stuff to prevent other things that are happening. So instead of firefighting a truck missed a delivery and we're short on supply of a component, it's what am I doing to ensure that there's no chance I have the right inventory in place, that that disruption can occur, and that I'm minimizing the frequency of those events so that the execution base is more streamlined and more seamless. So it's really kind of changing the mindset of like, you're not going to be successful on just working really hard and solving a bunch of problems. It's really around what am I doing to prevent problems from even happening and working farther upstream to get into those before they even happen.
Is there something about having a long-term supply chain vision that has surprised you? When people talk to you about this, do you have something you like to say that really gets their attention?
I think, to be honest, it's a sense of purpose, right? I think many times, especially early in career in supply chain and manufacturing, you kind of live by, depending on the role, by the hour, by the minute, by the day, right? If you're in production, and I was a supervisor and a planner, like, you just wanted every single next hour to be better, right? How do I ensure that I'm winning the hour, which then turned into winning the day, and then I'm sitting in a production meeting and, hey, did we win the week or did we lose the week, right? And really, it's now helping people understand that those little wins along the way, the hour, the day, the week, the month, are ultimately building to a multi-year journey that you want to get to, and folks understand the North Star, right? If you have a large cost out objective that you're looking at around where I want to be in 5 years, for me, I would say that's been the biggest kind of aha moment. Is it's now getting people and understanding that, like, hey, I might not get the fruits of my labor right away, but if I know the North Star that I'm going to, all those little successes, the brick by brick type mentality is ultimately then going to unlock, and you're going to look back 3, 4 years later and be like, wow, this is where we were and this is where we came. And it didn't happen overnight. It's multi-year, it's multifunctional. And really, if you can get the team around it, you can do some pretty cool stuff really quickly, um, which is, I'd say, different than just, oh, hey, did I get through today? And did production get through today?
I love that, and I think it also so echoes the culture of continuous improvement that lean manufacturing tries to instill. A little better every day adds up to something monumental over time. So, what a wonderful vision to have. I do want to come back to the focus group. So now, just to give our audience some context, a focus group is an interactive session on our summit agendas. It runs in our exhibition hall during networking breaks. So you're at the front of a group of chairs speaking into a microphone that's connected to headsets. So anyone who joins your focus group can hear what you have to say without worrying about the background hum of conversation going on around them. I think it's one of the best things we put onto our programs because it's an opt-in small group activity where everyone wants to be there, cares about the topic, has something they want to say or hope to hear. Now, you're there to share what you want to share, of course, but there are also microphones for questions or for other people to contribute. What are some of the things that you want to get into with the group or hope someone in the group will be able to contribute with your guidance?
Yeah, so first off, I'm super excited about the focus group. Last year was my first year attending NACES, and in all honesty, it was just such a great experience. After being out of the States for a number of years with career, COVID happened, kind of getting back with some of my peers and folks that I had worked with in Rockwell, but also just industry executives. It was a great learning experience. And really the focus group for me was one of the best experiences I had. So to have the opportunity to speak about it, speak at one is I'm super excited about. As I think about what the focus group I'll be talking about is really on, is I'm not here to by any means say this is how you do a supply chain strategy. I think every company is going to have a different way that they go about it. But ultimately, I think what's important for folks to take away is what are tools, right? We talked about at the beginning about lean methodology, lean problem solving. Like there's a boatload of tools that can be used to help craft and design. How do you go about creating this? And that's really the work of it. The upfront work of creating your strategy is actually probably more important than the strategy itself, because the buy-in, the culture, folks believing in it, then it just becomes execution work. And as operationals professionals, like that's what we do every day, right? We're execution savants. And for me, that's where like that, call it 12-week journey that we went on, and ultimately I've been a part of, was really the foundation for what were we going to do for the next 4 to 5 years. And I think that's what I want folks to take away with is the preparation work and the collaborating, the storming, the forming work is actually the most important part of the strategy, because then it just becomes, I know what I'm going to do by fiscal year, by month, by activity. Yes, there's slight pivots each year based on industry or based on market requirements, but that work that you do, that body of work over that 2 to 3 month period, ultimately just sets you up for success. So I really want to make sure folks walk away with, oh yeah, I'm not just putting something on a PowerPoint slide and calling it strategy. That forming, that storming, those tough conversations as a supply chain leadership team, as a company leadership team, are ultimately the conversations that enable the strategy to come to life. So as folks walk away and hopefully get into the conversation in the focus group, I'm hoping that we have some really open and candid dialogues around what are those tough conversations like? How do you have those? But then ultimately, how do you move past that and start actually executing? Because I think that's the next piece. Is a lot of people view supply chain strategy or like an enablement function of supply chain as, oh yeah, they do just a bunch of analysis and a bunch of, call it, high level overviews of things that we should be looking at in the future. I think the real difference and the real difference makers in the industry find a way to embed that into their day to day, whether that's in your company's strategic framework, their X matrix, assigning employee goals each year for how it's going to work, or functional goals at that level that directly link to the strategy, is ultimately the unlock, because then it just becomes part of your work, right? It's not this shiny thing that's out here. It's actually part of the work. So for me, it's going to be exciting to talk about, and I think there's going to be some really good candid conversations and good discussion and dialogue amongst the executives that are going to be there, and I'm super excited to facilitate it.
Absolutely. I almost feel like I can't have a podcast conversation these days without talking about how new technology and particularly AI is changing the way we talk about the future. How do tools like that fit into discussions about companies establishing their long-term supply chain vision and the strategy to deliver it?
It's interesting. It's been a topic I've pondered with over the last few years as it's come to light. And I think from a marketing standpoint, the way media is today, social media, it gets a lot of like, if you're not doing AI, you're behind the game. I think like any technology that's been introduced, whether it's multi-echelon inventory planning, the way that you do transportation visibility, the way that you do production scheduling and production management, MES systems, ERP, this is just the next technology that fits into your tech stack in your supply chain network. And I think that's the piece that folks have got to start to rationalize around is AI is not the unlock. AI is a component of the unlock that links into your strategy. And if you don't have a purpose or a use case for how you're using it, it ultimately just becomes this fancy thing or shiny thing that folks say, oh, yeah, we do AI. But are you purposeful about it? Are you intentional about it? I think that's for me is where you differentiate leaders is between how are folks intentionally using technology to enhance their processes, but also enable their people to be more successful and change the way that people are doing their work. Yes, AI is 100% going to change the way that we all live and do our work. But if you're not intentional about how you are institutionalizing it or embedding it into your supply chain or embedding it into your company, it just becomes this tool or this idea that's like, oh, yeah, I do AI. But if you're like, hey, I use AI for this, that, or this other piece, then it becomes intentional and ultimately value add for the organization. And you get better buy-in and essentially belief that, hey, this new tool or this new technology is going to be a differentiator for us in the way that we work and the way that we support our business and our customers.
I think it's such a valid point about AI being just the next iteration of tools, especially in the supply chain space, where data analytics is something that you people have been living and breathing for decades. And if this is the one that is getting buy-in from people that really excites people, that's all to the good. And some of those pilot projects will be able to scale company-wide because there's a built-in enthusiasm. There isn't the fear factor. Some of the change management stuff has already been done. It's an exciting time, but it's not we're completely changing the script. It's the next evolution. So I love that answer. I do want to pivot a little into maybe the leadership aspect of building a strategy and delivering a long-term vision because I think there are going to be supply chain executives who have done this in the past, but probably a lot of the people who are going to join the focus group are doing it because they say, my company is going to want me to do this at some point. I wonder what other people are doing. Can we come at this from the perspective of people who haven't done a strategy before and maybe are coming in at a sort of entry level, understanding what other people want to do, being a little vulnerable, admitting what they don't know?
Yeah, no, it's a great point, Jeff. And to be honest, like I would say I was one of those people. I was super fortunate in my career that a lot of leaders were intentional about getting me experiences across each discipline of the plan, source, make, deliver. And at the time, I probably didn't appreciate as much as I did now, where I now sit, call it 10 to 12 years in, and have walked kind of plan, source, make, deliver in each of the functions. I would say the thing that is unique about my experience in really building a supply chain strategy, I think is going to resonate with folks as we talk in the focus group is many times you see a lot of supply chain executives that are leading the strategy function are 20, 30-year industry vets. I am by no means that individual. I have not experienced or seen nearly what a lot of my peers have um, in the industry and from a supply chain perspective. COVID was probably my first real supply chain disruption that I had to kind of work through and manage from a leadership perspective versus being a tactical individual contributor. But for someone who's been 10 to 12 years now in industry and career, it's okay to be leading this and not having all the answers. I think that's the beautiful part about a supply chain strategy is you're bringing people together, you're bringing teams together to craft it and develop it together. It's not driven by your strategy function. You are the caretaker of it to help facilitate and guide and bringing leaders together to help create this whole piece of it. And it doesn't have to start from the top. I think there's another misconception that your chief supply chain officer has to develop the strategy and go like the way teams work today and the way the supply chain works is you flex between all of those different functions, and the folks that are able to play different hats or play different roles from a cross-functional understanding and cross-functional knowledge or awareness perspective are ultimately the most, maybe a little unprofessional, dangerous as supply chain leaders. So for me, that's the one thing I want folks to take away, and really I want to express from me is I didn't have all the answers coming into the role that I'm in. But I was fortunate to have some really great experiences prior to this, but then also work with a lot of great leaders to help develop something that we have. And I think that for me is going to be a takeaway for folks as they go back into their organization and think about how do they bring this to life is you don't have to be the 30, 40-year industry vet to develop a strategy. Your job is to bring teams together. Your job is to bring leaders together and provide your own individual experiences and perspectives so that you bring the best of everything together. And with those diversity of thought and diversity of leadership, you can really create something special that resonates with the organization, but also delivers the results that your business is looking for.
What a great note to end on. And once again, everyone who is listening to this, who will be attending the North American Supply Chain Executive Summit this September in Arizona, John's focus group is taking place during the networking break on the morning of the 18th. There will be lots of signage marking out a seating area where all the chairs have wireless headphones on them. You grab a set of headphones and you will be able to hear John loud and clear. John, thank you again so much for your time today, and I look forward to meeting you in person at NACCES 24.
Jeff, thanks so much. Super appreciative of the time, and very much looking forward to meeting you as well as the others that are going to be at the event.
Absolutely. You've been listening to another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. I've been Jeff Nix. Let's do it again soon.